Wrestling is athletic performance meets bodybuilding meets a melodrama. Professional wrestling is all that and so much more. I'm John Renton with my review of Hollywood Dreams, Episode 5, The Real Iron Claw, a Max original that has had a few episodes so far this season, and I decided to check this out because a friend of mine in Texas told me that they were doing this, and I'm like, okay, I'll check that out, see if there's any new tidbits of information. There were a couple parts that made me even tear up because, oh boy, geez, there were some heart-wrenching moments here, but a lot of it is treading familiar ground. I will say I will take this over the Iron Claw, even though the Iron Claw had slick production values and a cast that certainly tried. So many inaccuracies that really should have been a goddamn miniseries. So yeah, it's like HBO Sports, Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. They did a good job presenting the Von Erich story, even if so much of it has been told in shoot interviews and in documentaries and the aforementioned Iron Claw movie. They had good talking heads. But I like how, they had some graphics about how 90 million people watch professional wrestling. It's $1 billion industry. And Dr. Phil, who I'm not the biggest fan of. He comes across as kind of douchey in all honesty, but he did offer some good insight here because he does understand how, addictions and injuries and various things can pile up and twist people around and, how athletics can affect various people throughout their lives. And that's when he said wrestling is athletic performance meets bodybuilding meets a melodrama, and he's 100% right. And I will always love professional wrestling, even if I'm down in the dumps about life, as we all are. I'm good, don't worry, trust me. Compared to what a lot of other people are going through, I'm fine. But even if I'm feeling low, professional wrestling can pick me back up, and then it can drop me again, like it has recently. But I will always love it. I've loved it since War to Settle Score 1985. And great talking heads here. I like that MJF was part of this. I wish that they had included him a little bit more in the Iron Claw when he was Lance Von Erich, but nevertheless, you'd have Lacey Von Erich, one of Kerry's daughters, as well as Chris Jericho, who looked like a badly preserved ham. He really should not be on camera anymore. And, of course, you get Kevin Von Erich, you get David Manning, you get one of the two cowboy-hatted guys, I forgot to write his name down, that would always lead the Von Erichs to the ring. And you got Holly, that was one of the, that was Kerry's other daughter. She was really the shining star of this thing. You had Kristen, who was Kevin's daughter. There really is a spade and image of him, to be perfectly honest. You can definitely tell there's no disputing that is his daughter. And again, familiar stuff here. MJF did talk about how the Von Erichs were the blueprint of, blueprint of what wrestling should be. They were important to the industry, and they were. They were. I think they fluffed up a little bit too much of how important World Class was, because take a look at where it started, big time wrestling and all that, and then go to its peak. By the time we got done with the, David Von Erich memorial, show, the third annual one at Texas Stadium in 1986, yeah, Kerry Von Erich's motorcycle accident, things were already starting to go down as far as attendance and stuff like that, because, and I don't care what anybody says, Fritz Von Erich pushed his goddamn kids to do this stuff, and yes, he wanted them to have the, ability to earn money in professional wrestling. I don't think he was the worst person in the world, but I don't think that he was necessarily a great guy. And being a promoter that had a bunch of sons that had a certain level of professional wrestling and one that should have not been in wrestling, more on that in a bit, really probably should have said, maybe I shouldn't be such a harsh goddamn dick. Now, that could have been because of how he was raised by his father, and just, yes, it was back, in the old times, the before times when people still saw in black and white. 6 sons, 5 died. Jack Jr., 52 to 59. David, 58 to 84. Mike from 64 to 87. Chris from 69 to 91. Almost said the joke, not going to say it. And Kerry from 60 to 93. So, one I did like here was Skashi Cole, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She was a culture writer. I thought she provided some good insight. As somebody that knows a little bit about wrestling, but also presented it from a writer's perspective and, more of an outsider's perspective. And I actually thought she really did a good job here. I probably totally butchered her name. I do apologize. But I love the old footage. I really fucking loved all this old footage. There were deep cuts here. There was stuff in Tel Aviv, news reports, training footage. Fritz and, like when he was Jack Atkinson and when he became Fritz von Erich, just all that old black and white stuff in the train foot, all that old stuff is really, really cool to see that shit. I'm really glad that stuff exists. I imagine probably a lot of that was from home movies and footage that Kevin had acquired. Or Fritz had acquired and whatever. The Iron Claw. You can check out my review of the Iron Claw movie because I'm not going to go too deep into it here. But again, that fucking thing was so inaccurate. Kerry's foot, being removed did not happen the night that he won the goddamn title. There were so many issues with that. They cut out Chris Von Erich. And it's because the story was going to be so sad and the movie's already running long. They could have cut certain things out and done and just... The more I think about it, the more I hate the Iron Claw for just the fact I couldn't turn my wrestling mind off. Same with Queen of the Ring. And I know less about Mildred Burke than I know about, any stuff with the Von Erich as far as history, documentaries, and all that. I like David Manning as far as, like, the insight he provides here, but he just comes across as a bit disingenuous. Like, he still believes some of the bullshit about how some of the brothers died. So, Fritz meets Doris. It's a whirlwind romance. Fritz was not able to go to Helsinki, not to fight Ludwig Borga because he wasn't even born yet, to be, I think, a discus thrower in the Olympics or it was some kind of Olympics thing. I know Kerry is a discus thrower. And... so he meets Doris, gets into professional wrestling. Holly carries our daughter. Again, I really did like hearing from her on this. Lacey, I've seen enough footage of Lacey acting odd multiple times to where I think she wasn't cut out for wrestling. She couldn't really wrestle. I mean, if you saw her stuff in TNA, good God. I mean, good God. Not that that was necessarily a shining example of great professional wrestling because they had great people. But then they put people in the ring that didn't necessarily belong there, Velvet Sky. But Lacey, yeah, she probably should have found something else to do. Modeling or acting or stuff like that. But MJF provided great insight. He was actually kind of the historian of this because he has studied professional wrestling. And he's one of the few that you can buy into still, as we all know it's a work. I did not know that Brian Adias was still alive because so many from the world-class days had passed away. I kind of wish they had gotten Iceman King Parsons for this. I wish they got Michael Hayes for this, but Michael Hayes is under WWE contract. I don't know if they want him to participate in this. Fritz's run as the goose-stepping Fritz Von Erich, look, it worked. He was teaming up with Waldo Von Erich. They were a big team. And then when Jack Jr. died, getting electrocuted, around trailer park, that kind of stuff, motor coach, whatever it was, he either he got electrocuted and died or he drowned in the puddle. No way of officially knowing. Still sad. I mean, he was 6, 7, that's really sad. It changed Fritz. He was furious at everything. If I sounded like I was the living embodiment of an entire carton of smoked Pall Malls, I'd probably be upset too. And the idea is, instead of grieving, just have another baby. That was the thing back then. I mean, both my parents, my mom comes from a family of 6 and my dad comes from a family of 7. Or maybe reverse it. I mean, there's a lot of people on both sides. That's what people did back then. My grandma on my mom's side, I think, was 40 when 45 when she had her. 40. Good Lord. Grandfather was 45. Whole point is that when you don't want to grieve, you just do that. It doesn't fill the hole. That's not a euphemism. I'm trying to be serious here. But Kevin, he didn't necessarily think that he fit being the older brother, but he had to be because Jack Jr. Isn't around anymore. The old footage, like Brian met the brothers in school. That was kind of nice that Brian was there to provide some insight. Brian Diaz, I don't remember him doing much of anything outside of Dallas, but whatever. Kevin, or not Kevin. Kevin and others talked about 96 acres of Fritz bought on, in the middle of nowhere, so the brothers could train, weightlifting, track, and all that and everything. He talked about some of the track regiment stuff that they would do. I don't know how old these boys were when they were doing that stuff. I mean, yes, you want to train them young, but you gotta let them be kids. Gotta let them have some, gotta let them have some fun. Gotta let them do this. But god damn it, that just seems ridiculous. People took to the boys because they watched them grow up. I mean, that's the one thing you can tell. Is like you talk to anybody in the Dallas area of a certain age, maybe even people that did not see the Von Erichs in their prime, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, probably still remember hearing echoes of the Von Erichs at the now demolished Sportatorium, or Reunion Arena, now demolished, or Texas Stadium, now demolished. But Kevin wrestled barefoot, and Kevin was a very freakish athlete. He was very, very good at what he could do. Kerry had the physical charisma and could do the dancey punch and do all that and spin around and throw a very effective dropkick. David was basically the epitome of what you would want a wrestler's son to be. He got it. He understood the psychology, the promo. He absolutely understood how to do things well. And then they said when Fritz became a promoter, he changed wrestling forever. Okay, if you believe it. Yes, world-class presentation on like television, the Christian Broadcast Network and all that. They skipped over the being saved thing, but maybe they didn't have time. It was Big Time Wrestling. And they changed it to the World Class Championship Wrestling name sometime in 1981, 82. Yes, the big production, the multiple cameras, the microphones around the ring, in the ring. That was cool. And the Sportatorium, they made it look great. You take a look at how that place looked when there weren't people there, even in the 80s. You take a look at like just pictures of it. That place was a toilet. Also, there was a fire, possibly started by a, like a rival wrestling promoter, that led to so many issues that they renovated it, but then they just put like a sheet of metal, I think, down the middle, if I remember right, hearing about like documentaries. And I think Cornette talked about it on his podcast because he worked in World Class for a time with the Midnight Express. And then they talked about, before the Von Erichs, no one had, came out to music. And I love MJF. That's wrong. Any wrestling fan that has studied wrestling would know that. Now, the Von Erichs may have helped popularize it, but the Fabulous Freebirds were coming out to it. Chris Colt, Welcome to My Nightmare. You had Bad Leroy Brown. You had Gorgeous George coming out to Pomp and Circumstance going back years. Now, yes, not that many wrestlers were coming out to music. In fact, if you take a look at even the earlier Royal Rumbles, Vince, who had the slick production, the big budget and all that, still wasn't having people come out to music, like everybody come out to music. I think WCW might have beat him coming out to music, as far as like everybody coming out to music, at least for big pay-per-views. But, they made $11 million, or just over $11 million in 1982, to be over $36 million in today's dollars. And that's a big deal, and that's before they really started to explode. They got shrill screams from the girls. I don't think Chris was married, but, Kevin was married. He met Pam early on. And it was great to actually hear from Pam on this. I'm glad that she's still around. And she, chimes in about, meeting Kevin, them falling for each other. That was very nice. It was very sweet. It was certainly better than what they told in the fucking movie. David was married. Gary was married. Mike even had a wife. Mike was only 23 when he died, so he must have gotten married really young. I don't think Chris had a wife. I'm not knocking Chris. I mean, if he did, I apologize. But so February 84 in Japan, David dies. Fritz basically realized that David was sick, but we'll get it checked out after you come back. Now, he apparently may have had gastroenteritis. I'm not saying that he didn't. Dr. Phil seems to think septic shock, which is possible, or a septic, like infection of some type, and he's probably more accurate with that because certain things got misdiagnosed even back then. Joe Higuchi called David Manning. David Von Erich dead. Trisha called Kevin. Trisha was David's wife, and that was heart-wrenching to hear that. I mean, hearing about your brother passing away. Manning told Fritz, and what they kind of skipped over some of this because David Manning had said before, he told Fritz, drove back into town to get some answers, and then drove back out and Doris met him and said it was a mistake, right? Well, it wasn't. David's funeral had thousands of people in the building, outside the building. It was a big goddamn deal. Texas got hurt that day. As Kevin has said in previous things, I do believe that David had some kind of intestinal thing, but he also was on massive amounts of drugs and pain pills. And, MJF even said back then it wasn't guaranteed money. You pop that pill and you get in that ring or you don't get paid. He's not justifying it. That's just how it was. And that's how it was in multiple promotions. Vince McMahon made a killing, literally, off the bodies of various people. Paul Heyman made a killing off the bodies of many people in ECW. And that was in the 90s and early 2000s. Again, I don't like Dr. Phil very much, but he brings up some good points. Kevin and Kerry didn't want to wrestle, but Fritz is like, we can't lose the momentum. Technically, you could have. You had a deal with Watts. You could have brought people in and said, ladies and gentlemen, due to the tragic death of David Von Erich, we apologize. But Kevin and Kerry are going to be missing some shows. And also Mike Von Erich had started at this point. They could have just kept it, low-key, given him a couple weeks off. I'm not saying that would have been long enough, but it would have been something. They had a little bit of time off, but it wasn't nearly enough. And the show must go on. No, the show must not go on. Mike should have never been in the ring, and I'm sorry if that, offends anybody that is a Mike Von Erich fan. The 3 people that are still alive that have no cognitive function, I'm sorry, he never should have been in the ring. I'm not saying he was a bad athlete. He wanted to be a cameraman. That didn't work. It's a shame they actually didn't get Bill Mercer to be part of this, because I know they had to have filmed this a while ago, but Bill Mercer unfortunately did pass away recently at the age of 99. The David Von Erich Memorial, they made it seem like Mike, made his debut around this time. He actually made his debut in September or October of 83, so he wasn't wrestling long, but the Von Erichs versus the Freebirds glossed over very quickly. Fritz even came out of retirement. The house jumped $200,000. They did north of $400,000, which would be like $1.2 million in today's money. They had a reported $45,000, but I think only about $38,000 or so paid. Still, that's a big fucking house. Kerry and Flair had their encounter. It would have been David that had won the championship, but he just wasn't around anymore, unfortunately. And Kerry got a big pop, but the thing is, it didn't last. And it didn't last because, all due respect to Kerry Von Erich, he wasn't going to hold the title that long, and he didn't have everything that David had. David had the ability to carry himself as a world champion. Kerry had the ability to perform and work some good matches. Flair had talked about how Kerry had been a little bit under the influence a few times. And there are plenty of stories about the boys missing shows or being in an altered state and stuff like that, because even though they talk about how many times the world-class crew ran, they ran maybe 5 days a week, maybe 6, if it was a big touring time. Some of them were short trips. They would take trips to South Texas or West Texas, but they would have a lot of downtime. So therefore, instead of being on the road or traveling as much as, say, Mid-South next door or Jim Crockett Promotions or even the AWA, even though they were flying, and other territories, Portland was a short trip territory, but still you would have some long trips, like if you were going Portland to Eugene, even Seattle, if Don Owen was still running in Seattle at that point. And the WWF, it was nuts. They were driving, they were flying, they were taking a goddamn rocket car. So yeah, there was a lot of crazy travel. I'm not saying there isn't so crazy travel now. People have to mostly spend time on planes, which drive me nuts. But the footage of Mike in Tel Aviv, getting his shoulder injured by Gino Hernandez, toxic shock syndrome. Dr. Phil pushes back, says it's probably septic shock. Had it been treated, had they known what they were doing, they would have been able to probably treat it a little bit better. 107-degree temperature really fried his brain. He got back in the ring in 6 months when, no, he should have never gotten back in the ring. He was having rage issues, CTE, or his brain was just fried from the fever, which is entirely possible. Had multiple car accidents, attacked a stop sign or a traffic light. And they glossed over the Lance Von Erich thing because at this point, after Mike Von Erich got injured, and that was the role that MJF played, and I just want to mention this really quickly for those that don't know. Lance Von Erich was Kevin Vaughn, V-A-U-G-Y-H-N. That's what I meant, G-Y-N. Hey, Kevin Vang. So, nevertheless, he was brought in to be a Von Erich. He was Waldo Von Erich's, he was a relation to Waldo Von Erich. There was a kayfabe, that means storyline brother of Fritz. And the thing is, they skipped over that, and that's when fans really started to have issues with this because it came out very quickly that they knew he wasn't a Von Erich. If they had said, hey, we're bringing in this good-looking guy, we're going to have him work with our top guys, his name's Kevin Vaughn, but not Kevin Von Erich, that would have worked. People would have bought into it, and Fritz kept making these mistakes, thinking that the fans would buy into the mythos, when at this point, by the time, what was that? That was the Cotton Bowl in 85. That was September, October. Mike had was the rookie of the year. He came back looking very gaunt and hollow. And, he wasn't very big to begin with, and he really was skeletal at that point. Lance Von Erich came in, and then in February, 4 or 5 months later, Gino Hernandez passes away. So you have all this stuff going on. You have this hated heel with something that people, somebody that people loved. You have this going on. You have the David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions that did not end up working at all. Even by 86, they went from like 42 to 45,000. 85, they went to like 26,500, something like that. They went down to 24,000 at 86. Now, that sounds pretty good, but they're telling the story segmented as far as the brothers go. Kerry Von Erich getting his foot, caught in the bike spoke, whatever the fuck he did. That would end up leading to basically a massive downturn in business that was already starting to nosedive. Because they knew that Lance wasn't a real Von Erich. That was a big fucking thing that they omitted. Now, yeah, they wanted to just tell the story of the Von Erich family, but whatever. Mike died, went to sleep in a sleeping bag with a bunch of pills and some beer, and maybe rolled down the hill and went into Lake Dallas, or rolled down the hill and ended up near Lake Dallas. But the attendances I'm telling you about, for the 1987 Von Erich, David and Mike Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions, they kept shit quiet, I guess, somehow, about the exact details, hoping that maybe it would not drive business down. Business was already going down by this point. Texas Stadium. Google Texas Stadium, not where the Cowboys play right now, but where the Cowboys used to play. Google where, Texas Stadium, world-class Texas Stadium. Google the capacity of that venue. Even 24,000 there was a big deal, but it still could kind of look ridiculous if you didn't pack the people into some spots. 5,800 people in 1987. There was something that I believe was on the Cultaholic Rise and Fall of the Von Erich family, where there was a golden ticket, $100 thing, luxury seat, and dinner in the presence of the Von Erich family, and they dropped that after, I think, 14 people bought into it. Because the fans were getting disillusioned here. The fans started to blame Fritz. Nobody was allowed to grieve. Nobody was allowed to do this. And business was going down by this point. You had their booker, Ken Mantell, that basically took a lot of the talent, went to Universal Wrestling Federation in the interim. Because Universal Wrestling Federation was sold sometime April or May of 1987, around that, because that was when the oil bust happened, and that's why, in big part, Dallas's business started to drop as well, because you had, people didn't have as much disposable income, and also the tragedies and all this stuff going on. Chris Adams had headbutted that flight attendant, beat them up, or the stewardess, I think, and ended up basically ended up in jail. But this stuff's going on. Universal Wrestling Federation shuts down. Ken Mantell starts Wild West Wrestling. Bill Mercer's there. That didn't last long. That was a year, I think. But world-class business was going the fuck down. They then go to Chris. And he had asthma because of prednisone, something that diminished his physique. He was 5'5", 170. And he loved wrestling. And there's nothing wrong with loving wrestling, but physically he couldn't fucking do it. His body was going to betray him, in his words. And Chris should have never wrestled, but that didn't mean that he was a failure at life. He felt like he was, but he wasn't. And I mean, obviously, he never knew any of these fuckers, but you could tell just by looking at it. That's the most tragic one. And that's something they should have included in the Iron Claw instead of a few other things that they fucking included. But he did drugs to get bigger, i.e. steroids, I assume. I don't know if they necessarily helped, but he broke his arm on November 2nd, 1990. But he also had an asthma attack that landed him in the hospital. I say this as somebody that used to have a form of asthma, not a severe case, but enough that I did have an inhaler. Up to like 13, 14, something like that. That's when I was really getting into band, played the alto saxophone. I haven't played since like 9th or 10th grade, by the way, guys. It's a lifetime ago, but that helped increase my lung capacity, even though, and I say this again because sometimes people notice that I have a bit of, cough and sound a bit labored. It's because of strep throat, a big bout of it that took me out of work for 5 weeks. It's because of a super flu in February 2017, and about with COVID a few months ago that basically has given me sometimes this ability to talk, but maybe have a bit of a labor to it. I know it's not about me, but I just felt the need to say that because I did used to have asthma and it fucking sucks. Now, Mike left a note and said, I want Chris and only Chris to have my dive gear. There's pills in it. So that's what was going on. And then we go to September 12th, 1991. So not even a year after he broke his arm. He can't train. World class by this point. Jerry Jarrett was getting the fuck away from it because he had helped bring crowds back to the Sportatorium. And Kevin, in particular, was just, needling him. Because Kevin is not exactly a perfect guy. I'm not saying he's ever claimed to be. Kerry, at this point, was in the WWF. Had been in the WWF since the spring of 1990. And Kristen basically says, Kevin's daughter, Uncle Chris, says that he's sorry. So he shot himself in the head, had cocaine and Valium in his system. There are a few things I didn't know, which I'm glad they dived into a little bit here. And Kerry, then we talk about Kerry. So Chris was a tragic story, but it was a brief story because he was only 21 when he passed. Kerry's discus throw was good enough to land him in the Olympics, so that's when Jimmy Carter boycotted the Olympics. Kerry had all the looks. He had the athletic ability. He didn't have the full-on drive. And you can tell. Kerry would visit sick kids in the hospital, and try to do fun things and give back and everything, and that's admirable. And he was there for his kids, but he also was always on the road. He was only world champion for 18 days. His motorcycle accident, he lost his foot, in large part because he tried to come back to the ring too soon. That was June 4th of 1986. Not the day that he won the world title like the Iron Claw would have you believe, because the director apparently decided, I don't want to be factual. I'll stop dumping on the Iron Claw when they apologize for the inaccuracies. Anyway, so he came back in February of 87, even though they worked a cautious match, and Brian Adias, who I believe had turned heel within the last year or so, worked a cautious match with Kerry. Kerry tried to run to the ring in the Sportatorium, and if you look at the Sportatorium and look at how those stairs are, try running down there on normal feet. Now try to run down there on a surgically repaired foot. Broke his foot, this kind of stuff. They talk about he still had the heel of his foot, but he had to have a prosthetic. He had to do all this. He could still wrestle great. He could throw an effective dropkick. You wouldn't fucking know that he had a prosthetic foot. Roddy Piper talked about being in a hotel with him. He would just have the prosthetic off and just talk to him. Brett talked about, talking to Kerry. Kerry's very despondent while being in the WWF, especially after Chris passed. So he went to the WWF in 1990, and he signed for several $1 million, Brian Adias said. Okay, maybe a couple million. Because Vince was handing out those big contracts. He had some checks that he hadn't cashed that were for like $200,000, I think, combined. I'm not saying that Kerry didn't earn money, but there is no fucking way for several $1 million with Kerry at that point, with the fact business was going to start going down. Several $1 million. Incentives might have pushed it to $3 million over 2 years. But he had an IC title run. Didn't last. I think he won at SummerSlam 90, if I remember right, and he lost it. He actually lost it before Survivor Series 90, but they had taped TV before that, so he actually came out at Survivor Series 90 with the championship, and whatever they had taped before that aired in December, so technically he held it maybe it was right after Survivor Series, maybe it was the next taping, but he lost the championship a few months after, and then he fall further down the card. They were like, oh, he could be the next Hulk Hogan. Could you imagine if Vince McMahon had gone with goddamn Kerry Von Erich in 1984 instead of Hulk Hogan? I mean, Kerry would have looked the part, but Kerry wouldn't have been able to do anything because Hogan could talk. He hates the brother's brother, and he's a piece of shit, but he's also a big goddamn drawing card. Kerry would have never been that. I'm sorry, he never would have. So, Kerry didn't do rehab. His wife was divorcing him. They were at Chris Adams' house. The daughters were playing. A raid happened. And he basically couldn't take it. He couldn't take that. Chris Adams being involved in something involving drugs. Color me shocked. Holly recounts this, and this is where things get tough. No child should have to go through this. No child should have to go through that. At a restaurant, he says, essentially that they'd be better off without him. If you die, I die, Daddy. And, oh, God. I feel so bad for her. I mean, I feel bad for the kids in general, but Holly just recounting this, like, my word. Poor Holly. And then on February 18th, 1993, as house, not at the tree, right outside the house, Iron Claw, Kevin couldn't stop it. He was living on the Texas-Louisiana border because apparently he hates himself. And then he moved to Hawaii, and then I think that him and his son just recently moved back to San Antonio. So, nevertheless, Kevin got there. Unfortunately, the deed had already been done. He blamed Fritz because Fritz didn't take his call. This was rough. I mean, and Kerry, I do remember even at 12 years old being shocked about Kerry. I mean, granted, I didn't know this shit at the time, but you see somebody that you watched on television during your formative years, and you're like, well, shit. And then the Iron Claw movie is a total mess. The inaccuracies. They didn't like how Kerry was not portrayed as a family man and Chris was excluded and all that. Fritz and Doris divorced in 1992 after 49 years of marriage. I don't blame Doris. I don't think she lived much longer after that. It was Fritz. I'm sorry. It was fucking Fritz. He didn't take any personal responsibility, or at least seemingly never understood that he should. So, Fritz got brain cancer. He passed away in August of 97. If I remember right, the Terry Funk Amarillo retirement show was actually the day of or the day after. So, Kevin's sons are wrestling for AEW. They're in the background, literally, because I keep forgetting they're there. And Lacey Von Erich tried wrestling. Wasn't any fucking good at it, but at least she tried. Good job on trying. It's like watching Chris Von Erich try to wrestle, except Chris had passion for it. So, then we close with, Kevin being in a dark place, but seeing the light, that kind of stuff. And is it a curse? I don't know if it's necessarily a curse. I think it was a bunch of people a bunch of wrestlers' sons that got into a business, some that had the qualifications for it, others that didn't, Mike and Chris, and they could all still be here now. Fritz didn't want to be a responsible adult. Kept too short of a leash with his kids. They lashed out. Very certainly. But that's all I have to say about the real Iron Claw. A lot longer review than I planned, but I had some things to dive into. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Rentlin. I'll see you soon.